What up, guys? This is part 3 of Classical Conditioning Episode 2, featuring Dr. Stuart Shanker on the topic of self-regulation. Enjoy. What is the importance of having a musical experience, both passive and active, as a tool for self-regulation during the life cycle?
So I have a 13-and-a-half-year-old who has learned this year, and she did quite well. She's playing alto sax, and so she's in band. And at first, she dreaded it, and all I heard was, "I have to do this, blah blah blah." And then something happened. I don't know, somewhere along the way, by around December, and then at the end of the year, it was clear that music was by far her favorite class, by far. And so she's in she got into the good band, which is called the Tottenham Band. She goes to TCS. And so it was absolutely imperative that I come to such and such because T band was going to be playing. And so they were good. They were really good. And I was watching my daughter, and she had a look of radiance on her face. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I'm thinking, well, this is all, for a scientist, it's pretty interesting. You know, what's going on here? Because that kind of joy has to be nurtured. And then I met the music teacher. And she was just this wonderful human being who knew that the reason why she was doing this, why she was teaching this, why she wanted the kids to learn this, was because they would achieve this state of radiance. No other reason. So we kind of lost sight of that one, right?
Yeah.
Should it be a part of every child's education, of course? And unfortunately, in far too many cases, it does become an ordeal, right?
Yeah. Instead of just being something fun and...
Yep. And everybody can play something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a further point to make about your last question. I'm going to recommend that you read a book by Andre Agassi. The book is called Open.
Oh, okay.
So, I was a tennis player, and I adored watching Agassi, and he brought an intensity that was remarkable, and superhuman powers, it seemed, to just wear down any opponent. So then he wrote this autobiography, and it turns out that he was able to do that because he was on drugs. He used drugs extensively in order to be able to perform at that top level. But here's the part that really hit home. The book starts off, so this is one of the great tennis players of 1990s, early 2000s, I guess. The book starts off, "I have a dark secret. I hate tennis. I've always hated tennis. I hate everything about tennis. I hated picking up my racket. I hate it." And it goes on and on about how much he had come to hate tennis. And he did it because of money or whatever. And this is as true, and I have seen many pieces by musicians who said the same thing, how they came to hate their instrument. And the advice, I've always been puzzled by the advice given. You can go on Quora. Quora ran a series on this. Musicians talking about what to do when you hate your instrument or when you hate music. And the advice given was, well, switch to another instrument, or you've got to rediscover. No. So how could something that should be joyful, and playing tennis is a joyful activity, how could it become something that you hate? And I watched my son, who is a prodigiously good hockey player, and I saw his coaches turning hockey into something that he would hate. And my son once said to me, when he was young, maybe 10, 11 years old, I asked him, why do you love hockey so much? And he says, because it's the closest I'm ever going to come to feeling like I'm flying. That was very nice. And he's really describing a flow state, right? Mm-hmm. And the coaches were ruining it. Okay. That's an osprey. The coaches were ruining it. And so the answer to anyone who's starting to hate their instrument or hate a piece is you ask yourself two things. Why? And why now? Okay? And it's because of all the stuff we've done today, right? Pushing far too far, going deep into there's a system deep inside the brain that remembers when you pushed into your reserves. It doesn't like it. And the instrument actually becomes a threat. It triggers a threat reaction. It's what happens if you think that the key to success is perseverance at all costs. No, that's not. Perseverance at all costs is this sure way to destroy the joyfulness of this activity.
This is a great one. So, as musicians, we find ourselves playing the roles of follower and leader through various forms, groups, and relationships. How important is it for any teacher or leader of a large ensemble, orchestra section, or chamber group to understand the difference between leading with self-regulation in mind versus imposing compliance?
So, it is a fabulous question. It's a very complicated question. So let me see if I can give you a short version of it. There is part of being human is that we go into a unique kind of state when we're in a group. And so I call it group red brain. And so what happens when we go into group red brain is that you have these, let's say, two brains. Blue brain where we think, and red brain where we're very emotional and very instinctive. So when we go into group red brain, and we go into group red brain for lots of reasons. It was fascinating for me to see the scenes of when France won the World Cup. It was very interesting to watch the crowds on the street, and they were in group red brain. And it was a sort of euphoric state, this state of joy. And so when we go into group red brain, our individual blue brain shuts down. We become part of the group. We feel whatever the emotions are that are sweeping through the group. And there are lots of reasons why this happens to the human brain. When we're in our normal balance state, the blue brain is calling the shots. It's called an executive function. And so what it does is it makes decisions and choices, and it thinks and reasons and listens. But when we go into red brain, blue brain goes offline. In group red brain, everybody is in this sort of emotional contagion. And you can see this if you think about an ensemble or a group, how we're all in the same, in the same emotional state. And these emotions get sent from brain to brain like speed of light. But there's no executive function. It's gone offline. So what happens in music, or in any group, is that when a group is in this state, it creates a vacuum in which a leader can step in and take on the role of executive function for the group. So the leader will be the one that makes the decisions. The leader will be the one that determines the mood of the group, the emotions of the group, etc. Now, we have these emotions that we're talking about are very primitive emotions, and they split into two groups. And one group is very good, positive, pro-social, and these are the emotions of caring, compassion, empathy. But there's another group, and these are survival emotions, primitive survival emotions like fear, anger, rage, aggression. So we have these two sets of emotions, and the leader determines which is going to predominate. So I'll give you a really wonderful example of how a great leader, let's take Gandhi. Gandhi's good. So here we had a situation where there's a world war going on, and there was tremendous hostility to the British and riots. And so Gandhi would come, and so Gandhi preached this philosophy of satyagraha, so peaceful, nonviolent opposition, right? And the way he did it was fascinating. So he'd have this crowd that was ready to pounce, ready to go to riot, to kill Brits. Mm-hmm. And Gandhi would sit down, and he would lower his voice, and he would talk softly, and he would preach love and compassion and peace. And you could feel the crowd come down. So what he was doing was the group was in red brain. They had no executive function. Gandhi was that great leader was that executive function. And what he did was he soothed the group the way a blue brain should do, brought them back into balance. And we see Mandela do this, we see Desmond Tutu, I mean all the great leaders do it. And then on the other hand is the exact opposite, and that's what demagogues do. So they recruit the other side of our primitive emotions. They recruit fear, anger, aggression, and they do it for whatever reason. But it's very interesting for us to contrast. The example I love to give is Bobby Kennedy, when he had to talk to a crowd of blacks and tell them that Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. And there were riots at this time going on throughout the U.S. And through the same technique of calmness, and he spoke about justice and compassion, and the crowd comes down, and at the end, they were all in a balanced state. It's very interesting that when we look at conductors, we can see those conductors that go Bobby Kennedy or Gandhi, and those conductors who think that you bring the best out of your orchestra or your group through fear.
Yeah.
Fear of the.
Yeah.
And what we find is a couple of things. First, so you can go either way. As the leader of an ensemble, you can take them in this state. You can take them in either direction. They will go in either direction because their executive functions are offline. So what we find is, and I thought that Mozart in the Jungle was absolutely wonderful at conveying this, because what Rodrigo does is he says to them, you know, everybody's so nervous, the new conductor, I can't remember the old conductor, but he was the fear mode, right? Mm-hmm. And so Rodrigo comes in and says, no, music is fun, music is love. And you remember he has the scene, he takes them out and they play outdoors, and they rediscover the joy of music and playing. But what is happening here is, and this is the key, positive emotions create energy. Happiness, love, joy create energy. Music, one of the reasons neurochemically why music is restorative is because it creates, literally, positive emotions. Thinking of, I'm thinking of the choral in ninth, right? Like, yeah. Joy of Man, it creates literally energy, and we can explain this neurophysiologically. We can explain how music, when it is joyful and joyous, creates something called brain-derived neurotropic factor. It creates a neurochemical, which is energizing in the way that other, like in the way that, I don't know, running is or whatever. Negative emotions burn energy. So, unfortunately for the conductor or leader, whoever it is, if they think that the way to motivate an ensemble is through fear, they will be doing a couple things. First of all, they will not. They'll be doing harm to themselves. They will not be producing anything like flow. They will not. That orchestra or that band, whatever it is, will not be in a flow state. And secondly, there will be a lot of problems afterwards, and it's because that fear or anxiety state is so expensive that we pay the price over days, weeks, months, years.
Wow.
Think about school too. You know, I think back to when I was in university, and the professors I think of are the ones that made this fun. It was hard, but it was fun.
Yeah.
And then I have to force myself to think of the ones that thought they could teach us by scaring us.